Listen carefully, because some teams tell you exactly who they are before the season is even over. Not when the trophy is lifted, not when the table is final, but in those tense weeks when everything starts shaking. Arsenal looked like champions when pressure was distant and the dream felt clean. But the moment the finish line came into view, the football changed, the confidence drained, and the truth returned. This is not a story about one bad result. It is the story of a team that keeps climbing, then freezing when it is finally time to stand on top. A month ago, Arsenal looked like the team that had finally solved it. They were leading the league, they had built a serious gap, and the conversation was no longer about whether they could compete with Manchester City. It was about when the title would become official. But football has a brutal way of exposing teams when the season enters its final stretch. It does not reward you for being beautiful in autumn. It does not care who leads in February or March. It waits until every match feels like a final and then asks the real question: are you champions, or have you just been acting like them while the lights were still soft? That is the question hanging over Mikel Arteta and Arsenal now. What we are watching is not some sudden collapse from nowhere. This did not begin with one defeat, one poor weekend, or one unlucky performance. The drop had already started long before the results fully exposed it. Since the turn of the year, Arsenal have looked less fluid and less certain with each passing week. Supporters could point at the wins and say the points still mattered, and that was fair for a while. But results can hide decline only for so long. Eventually, the performances catch up with the scorelines, and the season begins to tell the truth. What makes this even more concerning is that it has not been limited to the Premier League. This pattern has followed Arsenal across every competition. In the League Cup final, they did not just lose. They looked toothless, cautious, and passive, as if they had arrived carrying fear instead of ambition. This was supposed to be the mature version of the project. Years of coaching, spending, and a squad built in Arteta image were supposed to lead to nights like that. Yet, when the spotlight grew harsh, Arsenal produced almost nothing. Then came the defeat to Southampton in the Football Association Cup. Another reminder that this team can still be pushed aside when games turn tense. Even in Europe, where they got through Sporting, the performances felt heavier than expected. This is a pressure problem. The biggest football reason for all of this is simple. Arsenal do not have the kind of attack that carries a title race over the line. History keeps repeating the same lesson. If you want to win the Premier League, especially in an era where you are competing with Manchester City, you need elite attackers. Not just tidy players, not just useful players. You need men who can twist matches with one action and drag points out of difficult evenings. Liverpool had Mohamed Salah, Sadio Mane, and Roberto Firmino at their best. Leicester City had Jamie Vardy and Riyad Mahrez producing world-class moments. Manchester City still have match winners. Arsenal do not have that edge. That is what makes their attack feel so fragile. The defense is strong. The structure is strong. The midfield has quality. But when Arsenal need a forward to tear open a low block, create something from nothing, or decide a match with one moment, the answer is never fully convincing. Too many of their attackers feel like good players asked to perform as great ones. Martin Odegaard and Bukayo Saka were meant to be the stars who would take this team through the final door, but injuries and inconsistency have stopped them from recreating the levels that once made Arsenal explosive. The uncomfortable possibility is that Arteta used the best attacking seasons of those players without winning the title. There is another layer to it as well. Arsenal look worn down. Too many key players have carried too much weight for too long, and that comes back to the manager. Mikel Arteta does not rotate with trust. He leans heavily on a core group and asks the same bodies to solve the same problems again and again. That can work when energy is high. It becomes dangerous when the season tightens and tired legs produce tired decisions. Arsenal have looked like a team running on tension rather than rhythm. But the deeper issue is not physical. It is psychological. Arsenal play like a side, terrified of making the mistake that ruins everything. That fear sits in their passing, movement, and hesitation before the final ball. Great champions do not always play reckless football, but they do play with conviction. Arsenal often play as though each player is thinking first about avoiding blame rather than creating danger. That is why so many matches feel sterile from open play. They can dominate territory and control possession, yet still leave the viewer unconvinced. So often, it feels as though they are waiting for a set piece, a corner, a second ball, something safe. Arsenal too often seem to tiptoe through matches. That is also why so many people doubted them, even when they were leading the league. Manchester City were not the unstoppable machine of their very best years. They opened the door again and again. Arsenal had chances to put the race away and never did it. Instead, they dropped points they should never have dropped and turned control into a test of nerve. Once that happened, the pressure only became heavier, because now they were not hunting. They were trying to protect something they no longer trusted themselves to hold. This is where Mikel Arteta becomes the center of the debate. He is not a bad manager. In fact, he has done remarkable work. Arsenal were in a far worse place before he arrived, and he has restored standards, structure, and competitiveness. He has built a side that can challenge at the top, compete in Europe, and behave like a serious club again. But the question now is no longer whether he improved Arsenal. The question is whether he is the manager who can carry them from contenders to champions. Because Arteta seems unable to sacrifice control for genuine attacking freedom, everything in his arsenal feels measured, instructed, and tightly monitored. That rigidity was useful early in the project, when the team needed discipline and identity. But now, it can look like a ceiling. The midfielders often seem too restricted to take risks. The attackers seem too coached to improvise. The whole team plays like it is following a manual instead of chasing the chaos that wins matches. When players with quality look afraid to attempt line-breaking passes, you have to wonder whether the caution is no longer theirs, but their manager. And that is why this Arsenal side feels so hard to trust, even when they lead the table. There is a strange absence of authority around them. Truly great league leaders make you feel that they are inevitable. Arsenal make you feel that something can still go wrong. This collapse pattern has become familiar. Each spring feels like a replay of the last one. The pressure rises, the football shrinks, and the confidence evaporates. So the truth about Mikel Arteta and Arsenal is not that they are failures. It is something more frustrating than that. They are good enough to get close, but not free enough to finish the job. They are disciplined enough to compete, but too fearful to dominate when it matters most. Arteta may have been the perfect man to rebuild Arsenal, but building a contender and finishing like a champion are not the same thing. If Arsenal finish another season empty-handed after spending so long in control, then the hardest question will no longer be unfair. It will be necessary. Has Mikel Arteta taken this team as far as his way of football can take it? If the answer is yes, then Arsenal's problem is not talent. It is the limit of the man who rebuilt them.